Hey everyone, just a quick spoiler warning before we head into this interview. We will be discussing details about the plot of The Banshees of Inisherin. Hi everybody, welcome to another brand new interview. I'm Kai Savas here, sitting with the amazing Carter Burwell. Carter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you again. We did an interview a few years back. We talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of your work with the Coen brothers, and so this one, now we're going to talk about your work with Martin McDonagh, who's one of my favorite writers and directors. But to start off our conversation, I just want to pitch a question to you that maybe is simple, seems simple, but maybe it's not so simple. But I'm just curious, what does music mean to you as a human, as an artist, as a storyteller, whatever sense you make of that question? What does it mean to you?
um, so there's two ways. Of course, there's probably 1,000 ways to look at that question.
Yeah.
For me, as a composer, there are two ways. One is, what does it mean to me as a composer when I'm making it? And the other is, what does it mean to me as a listener, right? They're very different things.
Sure.
I think as a composer, or actually in both cases, to me, it's really a way of conveying feeling through abstract means. In other words, as opposed to, say, for instance, with language, with poetry, it's music's abstract, same way, for instance, painting might be, but somehow is even more emotional than the physical arts. And I can't explain why. I don't know why that is, but it does seem to be an emotional language. And so then I have to say immediately, as a composer, one of the things that I find fascinating about it is that it's also sort of a mathematical language. It's all about ratios and meters. So the fact that it can be both mathematical and emotional is just striking to me. And I still can't quite, even at this point in my life, I still can't quite get my head around how it is possible to be both those things. But that's what makes it, honestly, very important to me. It's basically like putting numbers, communicating numbers through feeling, or feeling through numbers. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I love that answer. It's fantastic. And I want to rewind just a little bit before we jump into some current stuff. I thought a fun talking point would be maybe talk about Thick Pigeon for a little bit. I was listening to some old Thick Pigeon stuff, and I'm curious what your memories are working with Stanton Miranda and those days before, and how that kind of transitioned into whatever, whenever Blood Simple came along, and where on that timeline did it kind of shift you into the film world?
Sure. Well, when I first came to New York with the intention of doing music, but it was not my intention that would be a full-time thing. It was always sort of an avocation, but I came there because of the music scene. Miranda was one of the first people I met, honestly, there. We were just sort of reaching out to lots of people and getting to know as many people as we could. And she was very interesting. She was also interested in film. And she played bass in a band I was in. Then she left that band, but the two of us kept playing, her on bass and me on keyboard, and Miranda singing. And other people would come and go through the band, come and sit in on things. And we'd do little recordings. I say little recordings, but really it's just the two of us in a room, with reel-to-reel tape recorder. And somewhat amazingly, a label in Belgium started to put them out. So we were big in Belgium in the early 80s. And off of those, then Factory Records expressed an interest. Factory Records being based in Manchester, in the UK. And this was right around the time that also that the Coen brothers had sort of reached out about Blood Simple, and I'd given them some ideas. And didn't hear anything back from them, really. So I went to Manchester with Miranda. We worked on an album there with two members of New Order, Steve Morrison and Gillian. And it was just really interesting because Manchester was a very much a scene back then, right? Factory Records owned a club called the Hacienda. There were all these bands happening, and it was cool to be like part of that and at the center of that. We were there for about a month, and while I was there, Joel and Ethan called and said, "Well, we think we want you to do the music for our movie." okay, well, I'll be back in New York, in a week or whatever. And as so I also had a gig as my day job back then was as an animator, and had a gig in Tokyo as an animator that I had to leave for. So really, I just had like 2 weeks or something in which to, maybe 3 weeks, but in which to basically get Blood Simple done.
Wow.
So I flew back and did all that. But it was maybe my most exciting year, when I look
Yeah.
back on it, between just those three things, doing the album, the Thick Pigeon album and Blood Simple, and then going and lived in Tokyo for 3 months, working on anime there. It was pretty cool.
That's yeah, I love your animation background too. I work at Cartoon Network Studios. It's my day job,
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah, I'm in the animation world. I work with Genny Tartakovsky, and I'm production systems manager for the studio. So I live in that world as well. So, and I love
Okay.
your animation background too. But talking more about, I mean, those early days, I remember. I just want to just mention really briefly. We don't have to jump too much into it, but I think Psycho 3 is just like an underrated film and score of yours, as well as my wife and I, we actually love the sequels. I think they're all very interesting. I know like everyone
They're
who
all very
holds
different, right?
they're very different, and I love that Anthony Perkins got into directing and all that stuff. But I think the third one is so unique, and I just remember watching it and going, wow, this is actually not bad. Like everyone always says talks about like you think of the first one as the classic, it's like a Jaws and then all the sequels, and but they were all unique and different. And I just wanted to mention that I think it's so early in your career that you were able to do some cool stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was totally thanks to Tony. Like he said he wouldn't do the movie unless he got to direct, and
Yeah.
Universal was fine with that. And then amazingly, he called me. Like, I mean, I didn't have an agent or anything. In fact, they sent a letter to some post office box they found, and I found the letter eventually weeks later. And I mean, it's just by chance. So many coincidences, really, that
Yeah.
we got it together to do that. And that was really Tony's idea, to hire a different guy for a different sound, and that was, yeah, that was something. My first time working in LA, in some ways my last time working in LA, but also my first time. And yeah, it was very special to me too.
Yeah, very much. Well, let's jump into working with Martin McDonagh, and you've scored all of his feature films up to this point, and I just love. I mean, I just actually they just released In Bruges on 4K. Let me get it in there, but it's
Oh, good.
brand new set. I'm
Wow,
well, brand new Dolby Vision master, so I
that's
can't wait to
great.
check that out.
Yeah, I'm really
So
hoping like this film and Three Billboards. I'm hoping these films bring more attention to In Bruges, because I just think it's such a great film, but wasn't
yeah,
widely seen when it came out.
and I love that there's a little bit of an In Bruges reunion here now with Banshees. And so talk to me about working with Martin, and what do you remember from first meeting him on In Bruges, and how has that relationship evolved over these couple of films, or four, if it's four films? Yeah, we got
Yeah,
seven
it's
psycho
cool.
four movies. So has it changed? Has it not changed? Have you fallen into a nice rhythm, or is it kind of different on each film? I'm curious how the evolution of the relationship has been.
Well, it began really with just Martin reaching out. He was going to make his first feature. He had done a short called Six Shooter that had
Yeah.
won the Academy Award for Best Short, and it's a wonderful short. It really is.
Yeah, it is.
But I honestly didn't know him at the point at which he reached out. He kind of like, he was very modest about, I have some plays that I've written, and this short film now I want to do a feature. And then I bought copies of the scripts for a lot of his plays to get to know him, which is great. It was, I mean, I'm saying what I'm saying right now. Everybody else in the world already knows he's an amazing playwright, and
Yes.
just spending a weekend reading his plays really mind bending and wonderful. So immediately I wanted to, yeah, I did want to work with him, and of course the script In Bruges I really liked. Um, so that's how it came about. And I guess I flew to London to meet with him and his producer Graham Broadbent. I mean, we just had lunch and chatted, and he's a really nice guy, very sweet. He's not like any of the characters in his movies. Let me say that.
Yeah.
He's just a really sweet guy who kind of come up in the theater. So he's also very like, gives you a big hug, kiss. He's like very uh human, very much a human being. Again, unlike some of the characters in his work. And anyway, he's so we got along very well right away. And I think he had on the first film, on In Bruges, he had his own challenges that basically came from the film company. It's just like what it is to be doing your first film. You don't
Sure.
have any power or any juice with the studio, and they were just torturing about every decision that he had to make, and including the music. And they were like trying to get him to push the music this way or that, and he didn't want to push me any way at all. I mean, I had what I thought was a very clear idea of what the music should be, and it would play sort of the fragility of these tough guys, and their own existential issues, and play it that which you don't, which is the last thing you expect to see on the screen with all the
Yeah.
gunplay and everything, but that's what the music does. And the I guess focus features had some totally different expectations of what the music would be. So that was tough for Martin, harder for him than for me. I knew what I wanted to do, and I was just going to do it. But because also that's a good thing about when there's very little money, I get to do what
Right.
I want. What's the worst that can happen? They fire me. Um,
Exactly.
but he was happy with the music. I was very happy with it, and the movie came out, and I think did pretty well for for a first film. And then it got him the right to make another, and then with 3 billboards, which is a sort of surprise hit, he can kind of now do what he wants. But with this one, it's interesting. What he wanted was to make an even smaller film, like with just 3 or 4 characters
It
on
feels
shot.
very much like a play. Yeah, very much in that kind of stage play sense. Yeah.
It does. He wouldn't want to hear you say that because he it does have their exteriors. If he allowed the
But
outdoors,
visually, but yeah, as a visual
outdoors
film
is a
though,
big
it's
part of it.
so visual. Yeah, yeah.
I know. When he thinks of a play, he thinks, okay, something that takes place in 1 or 2 rooms. That's a play.
Yeah.
But this is 1 or 2 rooms and a vast exterior of Ireland. But yeah, it's interesting how he went in the direction wanting to do something so small as basically no plot. And sometimes he's a very extensive plotter, but in this case, it's basically you can describe the whole thing in 1 sentence very easily.
Yeah.
And I feel like the music is sort of like that too, where it's very much a less is more approach. Like if you can say it with 2 notes instead of 3, that's all better. And the script is like that. If you can say it with 2 words instead of 3, and there are long stretches of the movie with no dialogue, which for someone who came up as a playwright, that's a big step for him to want to write a screenplay where there's like a page with no dialogue. It's just descriptions of visuals and stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Anyway, so that's the main thing that has changed. Honestly, the way we interact is the same as ever. We don't talk about the music much before it happens, and then I just send him things, and he gives me feedback, and we're never in the same physical location typically because he's in London, I'm on the East Coast of the U.S. But he trusts me a lot, and I trust him, and so far it's worked out.
Yeah, it's and the film itself is yeah, you mentioned how the plot of the film is very simple. These 2 old friends, all of a sudden one decides not to speak to the other one, and is saying leave me alone. Is kind of put on the backdrop of the Irish Civil War, and then it just goes down this very dark path, and you treated it, I was reading on your website, which I urge everyone to go check out Carter's website, because you do these great little blogs about each of your projects, so they go way more in depth. And I think you're talking about how you're reading Cinderella with your daughter, Grimm's Fairy Tale, and kind of popped in your head because Martin didn't want to go kind of like Irish, traditional Irish route, so kind of treated it more like a fairy tale. But it does go down a dark path, and I do want to jump into some of the plot points, so I'll put a spoiler warning, and of course spoiler warning for anyone listening. So talk to me about the film, and when did you I know you also like to you like to work with writer and directors because you like to read the script first, but I'm curious, when do the ideas start popping in your head? Are you reading the script and go, oh, I'm getting some ideas, or do you wait for that first cut first, or lock picture or something like that?
Sometimes I get ideas from the script. I did a film this year, Catherine Called Birdie with Lena Dunham, and I knew when I read the script, I was even like just a third of the way in the script, I knew exactly what I wanted the music to be, and I even knew who I thought should perform it. But with Banshees, I really didn't know. I have to say, I really didn't know. And the only instructions I got from Martin was that it shouldn't be Irish. The score shouldn't be Irish, and which would have been the obvious thing to do. But when that's taken away, I really didn't know what to do. And So I waited until there was basically a rough cut of the film, and I just started putting ideas against it. And the character that you see the story through is Colin Farrell's character. He's also the first one that you see, and so I really just started with that, with his character, and trying things out, different arrangements, different melodies, and as I said before, I just stripped the melody. A lot of the time, the melodies comes down to two notes that just go back and forth, or
Yeah.
three notes. I mean, on the if you look at the music, it's like the simplest score ever written. Probably when I went to Abbey Road to record it, I'm carrying like this much, like this much music. I really felt like I hadn't done my job because it was so simple. But I say that facetiously. I do think it really works, but it
Yes.
was kind of embarrassing how few actual dots on the page there are.
Yeah, and I mean, it starts off kind of. I love the way it starts off, and you meet Colin's character Parik and Colm, and you see that, you don't know what their relationship was. But we kind of it starts with them not speaking, and the score does take a turn. I think after he cut, so Brendan Gleeson's character threatens to cut off his fingers every time, Colin Farrell's character tries to talk to him, and then you don't know if he's bluffing, and then he finally does it. And I think the score does take a turn after that first, because you're like, oh, okay, this is actually happening, and we start going through this path, and you're experiencing it through Colin's character, like his reaction, like what is going on. And so I'm curious, how do you think your score shifted in tone after that moment? And I think there's another big seismic shift is also, of course, when his beloved donkey passes away, and that moment is such a beautiful moment, a sad moment. I remember just sitting in the theater, just kind of weeping. Like you see this character acting with a fake dead donkey, but it's like the first innocence lost, I think, in the story to me. So I'm curious how your music shifted in tone as those kind of moments popped up, and where down that dark path did you want it to go?
Well, so yes, to put that in context, at the beginning of the film, you see Colin Farrell's character as sort of this happy lad, is the way they
Yeah.
put it in the film. And indeed, like in the very first shot, he's walking around the harbor, and there's a rainbow behind him. It's and then he's got his miniature dinosaur, almost like the opening of a Disney film.
Yeah.
And I play him that way, like a man child, like, and the music is almost something you could hear in an elementary school. It's like celeste and harp and marimba, um, but it is also a little bit off.
Yeah, that
The harmonies are a little chromatic and a little don't go where you expect them to necessarily. But the tone is light. I'll say that. And then at the point at which you're describing those shifts in his character, in his experience, it does get darker. Like you start to bring in lower. I start to bring in lower pitched instruments, lower everything. Sort of there are things happening an octave below where they were before, at the bottom of the orchestra, and the general feel is definitely getting heavier, but it's still the same tunes, and the celeste is still there, and the harp is still there, and the flutes. And I think for me, what happens is you get to the end of the movie, when
yeah.
it's the denouement, it's still basically the same tune that you heard at the very beginning, but now it's playing ironically. Like now it's sort of reminding you of the innocence that has been lost
Yeah.
along the way. And yeah, so and again, I don't want to go too much into the details of the story, but yeah, you see these horrible things going on, but you still hear the celeste playing along with the harp, and it still sounds like childlike music, but it's set against violence and destruction and very dark feelings, and I feel like it brings those feelings out all the more for not playing so much the darkness. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
reminds you of who Parik, his character, who he used to be, and um, anyway, that's the general approach.
Absolutely. Is there when you were working on the film, was there you mentioned you didn't know where to start, but when you were actually scoring the film, was there any scenes that you found challenging, or did it kind of fall into place once you kind of found everything?
To a surprising extent, it did fall into place. There were places where, like Martin and I would suffer over just getting the music, the right note in the right place, that kind of thing. Because it does, um, they're little reveals of, a finger, or something like
Yeah.
this, and like which is the right note to put on the finger, and how, and is it at this frame or 3 frames before? But they were all those types of things, like more about like how do we sync, what's the right beat on which to land this musical moment, and because it is like if it were an action film, it would be cut on action. It would all be very straightforward. You hit those cuts, but this is not an action film, even though it does involve some violence. The violence kind of like, even when the way it's shot, you don't even see the actual violent events.
You don't.
Typically, you see the results of them, and so figuring out, okay, so which is the moment when we want to like push the audience, a little bit further, and so that's what all the discussions are pretty much about that, not about the score as a piece of music, but really more about like which is the frame where we want people to go,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Is
like,
spotting something like that hard? Because you're talking about how sparse it is and how, so you have to be very kind of precise where the music is. Is the spotting part difficult? Like, is it just go off instinct of like, oh, we do need music here? Or when do you know when you don't need music? How do you know that you need to pull back?
so spotting in this case of this film was really the only day that Martin and I were in the same place together in a room together until we got to the recording. Of course, this was COVID year,
Yeah.
but it wasn't so much about that. It was just that he was in London, and that's where, and I was, where I live at the end of Long Island. So we did spot that extensively. Went through the film, talked about it. It's kind of what we always do, to be honest. I don't even on 3 Billboards. I don't remember specifically saying it should start here, it should end there. We just somehow don't quite do that. And in our spotting sessions, there's never a music editor there.
Mm.
Uh, it's just the two of us basically. I think on this one, the film editor Mikkel was there, but basically it's the two of us chatting, and it's as I then start working on it, I kind of figure out where I think the music should go, and then we start to get into it. It's almost like we spot in the process of scoring the film. It'll be like, well, should it? So I'll put something up, I'll put something together, I'll send it to him, and then we talk about, well, is that the right place to stop it? The right place to start it? Usually it's pretty obvious because, as I say, from the script, as a writer director, same thing with the Coen brothers, you can tell from the script pretty much where the music's going to go. It doesn't say
Yeah.
music's going there, but you will see, oh, here's a paragraph of text with no dialogue. It's just descriptions of things. There's probably going to be music there.
Yeah.
And that's true with this film too. The main thing that we talked about was just how much the music should say or not say, and we pretty much always pulled it back. Like it would be, I would write something and I'd say, an example would be, and this doesn't give away anything, I don't think, is there's a scene in which Colin Farrell's character is beaten by a policeman, was punched a couple of times by a
Yeah.
policeman, and then Brendan Gleeson's character helps him up onto his carriage and drives the carriage back home. But this is at the point at which they're not talking to each other,
Yeah.
and
And you have that
and
moment. I love that moment on the carriage, and he breaks
I
down
know.
crying.
So
Yeah.
it's like a minute and a half or something where there's no dialogue. It's just them riding silently, down these country roads. And I wrote a version of it where it did kind of like speak to Colin Farrell's pain. Like, here he is. He's beaten. There's all these dramatic and horrible things going on in his life, and he can't confide in his friend who's sitting right next to him because his
Yeah.
friend said, "You can't talk to me anymore." And so I wrote a version which like was more emotional, brought those feelings to, or as it developed, as the ride went on, those feelings kind of welled up. And I think Colin actually just cried during that scene. Um, and then Martin was like, don't think we need to do that. Let's just like keep it as like pare it back.
Hmm.
So it ends up, I think, just being harp, just basically cycling away at this very simple theme, but the restraint makes it all the more painful, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
Martin's right about that. And that was basically whenever we had any issue, there were not really issues, but discussions, there was almost always that
Right.
kind of thing. Like, can we take this and make it less? And in some way. Usually always went that direction.
Absolutely. And the film has stuck with me since I've seen it. I remember I went to a 10:30 show. It's a funny story. I actually went for an earlier show and I was like, this is great. I get to sit here, watch this film. I've been looking forward to a Martin McDonagh film for, a couple years now. And of course there was somebody talking. And I was like, oh God, someone was talking, like just having a conversation full out forward.
Oh
And
my
me and some
God.
other guy had to come and ask her to be quiet very quick. We're polite. Then she kept talking, and then the other person came and talked to her, and then I had to walk out, find somebody. At that point I was like, I already ruined it was like only 10-15 minutes into the movie. I was like, I have to walk out because I missed like five important scenes. And I came back, I'm like, I'm gonna come to the 10:30 show. I had the theater to myself, and I just loved it, having, and I'm glad I did that because I got to really just absorb it and not be distracted. And but it really stuck with me, and the images stuck with me. And I'm curious, as a composer who works on all these with these very great visual filmmakers, with the Coen brothers, with Spike Jonze, with Martin, I'm curious, do you ever just like, I'll be walking sometimes and like something about Fargo will pop in my head, like whether it's an image or a line. I'm curious, on the films and stuff you work on, does that ever occupy your headspace, just going about life, or do you kind of remove it from your headspace and it's like whatever is in front of you? So I'm curious, do you carry, I guess, everything you've worked on with you?
I have to say, once I've worked on it, it's
It's gone.
gone. It's in
Yeah.
the rearview mirror. Yeah. I mean, right now I'm out, like, doing what we're doing today, talking about Banshees with people, and I'm doing what I can to get attention for the film. But I've already done two more films since then,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so it's to me it's I love the film. I actually just saw it properly projected for the first time maybe 2 or 3 days ago at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it was
Oh
wonderful
wow.
to see
Yeah.
a good projection of it. It was so beautiful. But to me, the music and the and the project are basically done. And
Yeah.
you know I'm not a person who enjoys going back to things. Honestly, I really
Yeah.
don't.
Do you ever
So
watch, like, if it's on TV or something, do you ever catch something you worked on and just, let me watch a little scene or something?
what I do is, the way it comes up usually is just, I have 3 kids, and when they get to be like the appropriate age, show them like
Oh
Fargo
yeah.
or something. I'll say, hey, can we watch a movie? And I'll show them that. And I'd love to show them In Bruges. I don't think they've seen that. Um, they haven't seen this. I think my daughter saw many parts of it. She's 11, and she would walk in and she'd see Brendan Gleeson's fingers at first are taped, they're taped with green tape, because they
Right.
have to use special effects to remove them. But so she's actually seen the movie in bits and pieces, all in various ways. But that's totally different, you can probably imagine, then actually seeing it as a story where the emotional impacts, grow and grow. And I think
Yeah.
she actually may have gone to see it with her grandmother the other day. I'm curious to get the download, because yes, it's totally different. She will come in, she'll just see me working on it, and she'll hear the music,
Yeah.
hear me play it like 20 times. But that's still different than experiencing the story. And the stories has a lot of impact. So I'm curious how she takes it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's when
That's
I see them again. I
absolutely.
myself don't go back and watch the films I've
Yeah,
done
you're
or
seeing it through your kids' eyes. I
listen to
think
music.
but that's special
But
too. I think that's unique, definitely.
yeah,
Before we wrap up, I do want to talk, because you did mention Catherine Called Birdie, and I think that score is absolutely just so unique and different. And I'm curious, when you approached it and working with director Lena Dunham, writer director as well, it's sort of an a cappella score, but of course you have the upright bass there, so it's not traditional a cappella. But what made you want to go and do that and work with Room Full of Teeth and literally just use voice? I mean, how do you even write for voice like that? And what is the collaborative aspect of that? How much is improvisation? How much is it sticking to what you want and what they want and what they're contributing? I'm curious what that process was like.
yeah. Well, so as I already said, basically when I was reading the script, I think I had been listening to some Room Full of Teeth recordings, in the month or two before that. But anyway, but I was reading it, just thought, you when you read a script and it takes place in the year 1290,
Yeah.
Inevitably, as a composer, when you are going to ask yourself, so is this going to be like medieval instruments, and can I really say what I need to say with, lute and sackbut or whatever? And so the moment that I thought, wow, this would be pretty cool for voices. Like, I don't know, I think most kids, certainly me, and I think my kids, you make funny sounds with your voice. You're like, you kind of, score your life, by humming and
Yeah.
singing. For the story is told totally from the point of view, kind of in the mind of this 14-year-old girl. And I thought voice just seemed like the obvious thing. It would save me from having to think about medieval instruments, and it would put you like in her mind right away, I thought. And because I'd just been listening to a Roomful of Teeth, over the month or two before, and I just thought, yeah, they would be also able to uniquely do like unusual things with their voices, like,
Yeah.
right, it wouldn't be like hiring a choir. Like, if you just go and say, I need 8 voices for a recording, I'll say, okay, how many sopranos, altos, tenors, basses? And you'd get them, and they'd be fine singers, but they wouldn't be able to make it sound like a child's world, really, because they, you want to make some strange sounds and like do all these whoops and like growls and, things like that. Anyway, but Roomful lives in that world. So, and they study all sorts of different techniques. So basically, this also was a COVID project. I think it was probably,
Yeah.
2 years ago that I was doing this. And they once a year they have a workshop where they bring in composers who are working on commissions for them, and each of the singers shows kind of what their specialty is, what they've studied, what their range is, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. This time it happened online as a Zoom thing because of COVID, but it was so cool to be like in a video room, with each of them saying, so I really love to do my voice can, do these yodels, and or I like to do this very bass. And each of them, and they even send you sheets that say, this is my best range, but up here I can do this, and down below I can do that. And so it's not so much, you're not writing for generic voices, you're not writing for a
Yeah.
choir, you're writing for these individual singers, knowing what each of them can do. And as you say, it has upright bass. That frankly is totally influenced by this group from the late 60s and 70s called the Swingle Singers, that put out a record of Bach, but with them basically scatting
Yeah.
these Bach preludes, and with an upright bass, and it's just such a great sound. I could never get it out of my head. And so John Patitucci, I'm very happy to say, was able to do the upright bass, and Roomful of Teeth do the vocals. And you couldn't ask for a better group of musicians. I mean, it's just so
Yeah.
lucky to
What
be
a
able to do that.
wonderful score. It's so just fresh and original. So I really loved it, really enjoyed it. And and then one more thing before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention your good old friends, the Coen brothers. You worked on Macbeth with Joel, and I know you mentioned that Ethan was stepping away from films, but apparently he is working on a movie. So I'm curious, do you know if is the band going to get back together? I don't think Joel's involved on this one. Are you going to be involved in this? I know he co-wrote it with his wife, but it's so I'm curious what's going on with the good old band.
Um, well, so I think I think Ethan wrapped his shoot and he's editing now. And the expectation is that I'll work on it. That's what we've talked about. But I
Okay.
haven't um, we haven't had the conversation of like, like when we're going to spot or what kind of
Right.
score it's going to be. I think, they didn't, some films they edit while they're shooting, so that we get to the end of the shoot and there's some kind of an assembly of the film. He didn't do that because I think he wants to be hands-on with the editing. So, same with Joel. So it means that I won't. Ethan's still going to take a couple more months to like find his cut and start to think about what he wants. It's the kind of movie where, yeah, it's not obvious. I mean, I think I can say that this scene would be scored, this scene would be scored, but a lot of the scenes would be songs probably because of
Right.
the nature of the film and the story. So we have yet to figure all those things out. But basically, yeah, I'm assuming I'm going to do it, uh, and looking, really looking forward to it.
That's awesome because I really love what you and Joel did with Macbeth. I thought that was awesome to see your guys' take on that and Denzel's performance, and I love creative endeavors going in different ways, and hopefully all three of you can get back together one day for a project. But I'm excited to see what happens with this one. So
Me too.
yeah, well, Carter, thank you so much for your time and for your insight. It's been such a pleasure as always, and congrats on Banshees. It's such a wonderful film, and everything you do. I just love everything you do. So it's always a joy to talk to you. So thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you. It was nice talking to you too.